Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today is Monday, the 30th of April, 2018. I trust that you had an enjoyable weekend. I know for some, it certainly was not an uneventful weekend, and again, our condolences and our prayers go out to those families who lost loved ones during the past week or within the past few hours as well. It is our understanding, I believe it has been verified, has been confirmed, one fatality in the District of Northside yesterday, a road fatality as a result of a vehicular accident, and our condolences go out to the family of that young man as well. And I'd like to just take this opportunity, not casting any aspersions whatsoever, but just to take this opportunity to say to people, our roads are improved. Surfaces are much better. Despite what I have said about the width of the lanes, they're still wider than they used to be. Please drive carefully. Drive responsibly on the road. Observe the speed limits. We're here in the Cayman Islands on an island that is only 22 miles long, and I believe about 7 miles wide at its widest point. And where there may be more than hundreds of miles of roads in the Cayman Islands, you don't really have far to go. Please take your time on the road. The life that you may save may be your own. Be careful out there. Please be careful. We can't emphasize that more. We know the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service has been doing the same thing in terms of advising and appealing to people to drive carefully on the roads. And that includes driving while under the influence of any form of alcohol or drug that may impair your ability to drive as well. So with those few words, I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles, as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I need not remind you that For the Record is a show produced by the staff and management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor, and you're welcome to join me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls, normally that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and 949-6990. Of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, email us at For the Record. That is one word, For the Record, at candw.ky. We also have a WhatsApp number. That number is 925-3261, where we encourage you to send us a text message or leave us a voice note. If you leave a voice note, that will play during the course will be played during the course of the show as well. We're going to be talking with Hazard Management Cayman this morning, and we're going to talk about mass disaster preparedness until we start with that conversation, we'll talk about a few things as well, and we'll have the phone lines open until we start that conversation. You may recall us talking here on For the Record about the situation, the terrible situation in the UK in relation to what is now called the Windrush generation. And that Windrush generation would be people from the Caribbean and other Commonwealth countries who, after World War II, went to the UK to work because there were jobs available. There was a lot of rebuilding to be done, and some of the problems that they have encountered after going to the UK, and then eventually many of their countries where they originally came from gaining independence. Some had indefinite leave to remain in the UK. Some went there at an early age, and now are being told that they're not UK citizens, that they're in the UK illegally. The two culprits behind that, including, I would say, some UK civil servants as well, would be the current Prime Minister, Theresa May, and former, and notice I say former, Home Secretary Amber Rudd, who resigned this weekend as a result of providing misleading information. That's a nice way of saying lying. Providing misleading information to a committee, House of Commons committee. I say all of that to demonstrate two things. Number one, the UK, to a certain extent, is accepting responsibility. And number two, that when politicians find themselves in trouble, when they have lost the trust of the electorate, when they have lost the confidence of their parties, they resign from office. Not necessarily resigning their seats, they resign from office. Something that you rarely see in the Caribbean. Something that you rarely see in the Caribbean. Politicians are always trying to cling to power, to hold on to the office that they have, despite their misdeeds. Now, what is also important to acknowledge at this point in time also is that we have the son of a Pakistani bus driver who has replaced Amber Rudd as Home Secretary. And his name is Sajid Javid. And he, I think, is coming with a different tone, with a different approach to immigration in the UK. But a lot of what he does will also depend on the direction that the Conservative Party would take. I would venture to offer my opinion and say that the only reason that the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, has not resigned as a result of this is because of where the UK is as far as the Brexit negotiations are concerned. And for her to step down at this point in time would create enormous chaos in the political environment in the United Kingdom if she were to resign at this point in time. More than likely, if that were to happen, we'd probably see snap elections being held again as well, which reminds me that elections will be held next month in Barbados as well. I'll tell you that specific date later on, but elections are likely to be are going to be held in Barbados. I predict that there will probably be a change in government there as well. Barbados experiencing enormous financial pressures, financial issues as well. And whether or not the opposition there will be able to take over the reins, I think they have a very good opportunity to do so. The atmosphere, the climate there is ripe for that as well. Well, since I'm talking politics, let's move on to Bermuda then and talk about Bermuda. We have seen several resignations from the One Bermuda Alliance in Bermuda as well. The most recent one, Grant Gibbons. And so it looks like in Bermuda there will probably be 2 by-elections soon as well. The other one was Michael Fahey. He would have been a former immigration minister who is now in the opposition in Bermuda as well. So we're seeing elections, being held there. But the important one this morning is the elevation of Sajid Javid, as Home Secretary, the resignation of Amber Rudd, and that goes to show you what public sentiment, public opinion, public advocacy can do for you. You had people who stood up in the UK House of Commons and talked about this alarming issue and the way that people from Commonwealth countries had been treated. You saw Mr. Lamy, who is of Guyanese. At first I thought it may have been St. Lucian origin, but Guyanese descent as well, getting up in the UK Parliament, very well-read, well-spoken MP, and it goes to show you the pressure that is taking place. And like I've said before, we have to be careful here in the Cayman Islands that we do not end up with our own Windrush generation here in the Cayman Islands as well. Or because I think today is the closing date, the 30th, for scholarships. And I believe people have been flocking over to the Immigration Department to get those acknowledgement letters that they need for their youngsters who are applying for scholarships, for them to demonstrate that they are Caymanians. Something in our immigration policy, in our, not so much in our policy, it's in our law, and probably an unintended consequence that occurred in our legislation, where we find that those persons who are granted Caymanian status by the board or by the cabinet via the Legislative Assembly as recommended by the board, those persons have a certificate to show for it, as opposed to those persons who have Caymanian status by operation of law and they have absolutely nothing to show. Some people are smart, have been and went ahead and got those acknowledgements early. I got a call from a good friend of mine on the weekend reminding me that she had a letter for her daughter, and it had my signature, on it as well. I guess sounds as if I may have worked in immigration some time ago. Well, with those few words, we're going to take a commercial break. When we return, we will have our guest in the studio, and I will then make my introduction. So our mystery guest this morning, I won't let you know who it is until we return from the commercial break. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We have one caller, so I'm going to go to the phone lines because I actually missed that caller before we went to the commercial break. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record. Thanks for waiting.
Good morning, OC, and the listening public.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
You just caught me in time. I had to go back to work.
Okay, yeah. I know you were a tourism ambassador down in the West.
I thought it would be very fitting for me to call in because you mentioned World War II or during the war.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, I celebrated 73 years since my father got liberated from Camp San Bostel.
Okay.
That's the camp they was in, and they got liberated on the 29th of April in Germany. So they had a big celebration after, so I celebrated that at home here.
Mm-hmm.
Was 6 Caymanians there.
I was going to ask you how many Caymanians were interred in those in concentration in the camps.
Yeah, it was 6 at that camp.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they got liberated on 29th of April.
Okay.
So I plan to go there in August to visit the camp and the museum.
Okay.
And I'm hoping that some of the other families will be able to go Mr. Lee Smith were there, Captain Lighton, O.L. Bond from Georgetown, Mr. Hulbert Busham from West Bay, Elgin Scott from Cameron. Was 6 altogether.
Mm-hmm.
So not too many people remember it now. They came down on a Saboka on a Sunday from Jamaica, about 6 months after the war ended. So yesterday was a big day for me, knowing that the other day they got deliberated from that camp, 29th of April. So you'll be hearing from me.
Look forward to that, and certainly when you go and visit the camp as well, when you return, hearing about your experience as well.
Might even have it live. Ray is going with me, Ray Banker.
Okay.
So Radio Cayman might even have it live from up there.
Sounds great.
That is the plan.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Devil. You have a great day, and keep our tourists happy here in the Cayman Islands as well.
Okay. Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Folks, it is now my pleasure to introduce my guest this morning with me. And we're going to talk about the training that first responders received in incident command systems and mass casualty management, and as well as response to that as well. And it is my pleasure to have in the studio with me this morning Mr. Simon Boxall, and I believe you're the acting deputy director now?
Acting Deputy Director for Preparedness. Yes. Thanks. Glad to be here. Thank you.
It's great to have you. I want you to tell us, give us a rundown on it in terms of when this event took place and the participants and everything.
Okay, so the training commenced on Monday, April 23rd.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 5-day training course, and we had an instructor over from the Pan American Health Organization to assist. And it ran through till about 3 o'clock in the morning on Friday in our exercise, which took place at the Truman Bodden Sports Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a number of local instructors, Mr. Ian Yearwood and Richard Barrow, along with Andrew McLaughlin. And we worked together to sort of look at different areas of how we would respond to a mass casualty incident with different agencies such as police, fire. We had some volunteer agencies like Red Cross, and then 4 doctors from the Health Services Authority, and a variety of other agencies as well, EMS. So it's sort of very kind of critical that if these mass casualty incidents occur, when they do occur, that we're able to respond effectively. And they happen with such infrequency, thankfully, that it's difficult to expect probably our first responders to work together cohesively and effectively and efficiently if they don't practice, if they don't train. So that's really what it was about, coming together for sort of a major incident like an aircraft crash or a big bus crash, or so that we just perform well, government performs well.
Is this the first time that it has been held over such a long period of time?
No, it's normally actually a 5-day course, and we typically do run the exercise well into the early hours of the morning, just because these kinds of incidents, we can't expect them to happen during a 9 to 5.
Yes.
So, people are getting really tired. People have been, putting in a 17-hour day by the end of the training during the exercise. So it was hard. I mean, it was challenging, and it's always difficult. People took it very seriously. They have to attend every part of the course. So, the group that went through it, about 40 people, really sort of worked together. They invested their time, effort, and learned a lot. We all learned a lot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do we still have the gentleman from the Coast Guard in the UK here with us as well?
I have seen him, actually. Yes, he's here, I think, for a whole year.
Because I was wondering whether or not he would have been involved in the training.
That's a great question. I mean, I think he's probably here to establish our Coast Guard. I think he's kind of on a year-long contract. So hopefully, once we train our local, the Marine unit and all the different people that are going to be involved in the Coast Guard, then we will get them involved. But that's a great suggestion because, there's often things occurring out on the sea that require a response. And we're one of the biggest cruise ship destinations in the world, as you know. Like, I think we're in the top 5. Huge volume of ship traffic passing us.
Yes.
So.
And we have been fortunate so far. I think the nearest that we came as far as the cruise ships are concerned would have been the I'm trying to remember the name now. They actually had made a song.
There was a ship that, do you mean the ship that went
Ran
off Treasure
aground,
Island?
yes,
For
yes,
3
yes.
months it sat there. Yeah, well, Rhapsody.
Rhapsody, yes.
Rhapsody.
Yes.
And we did have the Star Princess catch fire on the way from Grand Cayman to Jamaica a number of years ago. One person died, 79 cabins were destroyed, but they were able to get the fire out. And but we've got aircraft flying over our airspace all the time as well. Who knows when, it's possible they may have to stop.
And there was the
mast dam. Do you remember the mast dam that struck the bottom as well of Lobster Pot, but it didn't punch a hole in the ship. But there was quite a bit of lead paint came off it, and
they almost had one in Rotan the other day where that
Did you
cruise
see
ship
that?
tore down the pier there and everything.
I think it was actually a mechanical problem with the ship. It wasn't a mistake of the captain. But I mean, they take miles sometimes, these huge ships, to come to a complete stop. Were you in the Merchant Marine, Mr. Ossie?
I spent my little 9 months, short period, when you compare to a lot of Caymanians who spent many years at sea. I spent 9 months. Good experience, a learning experience, even just for the 9 months.
Wow. With bulk carriers or?
Yes, I was on an oil tanker actually. I flew from New York to London, drove from London to Southampton, took the ferry across from Southampton, went to Le Havre, France, joined the ship there. It was called the Frisia, and headed to the Persian Gulf. First stop was in Cape Town, South Africa, on dry dock for about 2 weeks. So I had my little experience, there as well. We're almost, we have about 2 minutes before we go to our news, but just emphasize to the our listening and viewing audience the importance of this exercise in terms of keeping us up to speed with international best practice and everything else.
Right. Well, I think when these events do occur, you're going to have international media descending on the Cayman Islands. If State Department, all sorts of people will probably looking to make sure that the Cayman Islands government responds, in a really effective, efficient, and coordinated manner. So, a multi-agency response can be quite complex because you have different agencies obviously trying to work together. Who's in charge of the scene? Is it the fire department? At a certain point, if there's a fire, once they put out the fire, the police then take control over the incident. You have medics coming in. We don't want to overwhelm our hospitals. So, we don't want to transfer a disaster to the hospital. So you may have to set up triage in the field to treat people. You want to give people good treatment to increase their possibility of survival. So we try to do the greatest good for the greatest number in those sorts of situations. And I just think you build that muscle memory when you're exercising together, performing it over and over again, which is really what we did. You just it becomes familiar, it becomes more natural, and you just start, we just watched the teams of people starting to really work well together by the end of the exercise. And I just think it's an important exercise for us.
Great. Very important conversation, and we will continue this conversation with Mr. Simon Boxall as soon as we return from our 8 o'clock news. So, folks, please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back immediately after the 8 o'clock news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, I have Mr. Simon Boxall, who's the acting deputy director for preparedness with hazard management Cayman Islands. We're talking about the first responders training in incident command systems and mass casualty management that took place from the 23rd to the 28th of April of this year. The training included participants from many government agencies like the Port Authority, Customs Department, Cayman Islands Airport Authority, Royal Cayman Islands Police Service, the Fire Service, Health Services Authority, Cayman Islands Emergency Medical Service, volunteer agencies such as the Red Cross and Community Emergency Response Team. We had local instructors like Mr. Richard Barrow, Mr. Ian Yearwood of the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service, our own Mr. Simon Boxall with HMCI, Mr. Andrew McLaughlin with the Cayman Islands Airport Authority, Mr. Shane Brown with the Community Emergency Response Teams, and there was a PAHO instructor as well, and I'll get Mr. Simon Boxall to tell you his name. We have some remarks from the minister involved as well, and I'd like to share those remarks with you. She said that this type of hands-on training is crucial in the continued development of capacity within our emergency response agencies. She says first responders are building on their existing knowledge and expertise through participation in these courses, which should enhance our country's preparedness and response capability and ensure that we maintain a state of maximum readiness. And the course coordinator, who was the Hazard Management Cayman Islands Deputy Director for Preparedness, Ms. Danielle Coleman, she explained that a mass casualty incident is an event resulting in a number of victims large enough to disrupt the normal course of emergency healthcare services. For example, it could be a situation such as a major fire or a multi-car traffic accident. And she's quoted as saying that Hazard Management Cayman Islands, we are strong believers in increasing local resilience and knowledge. Consequently, some time ago, a number of local instructors from a variety of first responding agencies were trained to facilitate both MCM and ICS training, which would be Mass Casualty Management. And what's the ICS stand for?
Incident Command Systems.
Incident Command Systems training. And she said it makes sense to utilize our own facilitators because they have an extensive knowledge of how things are actually done locally with regards to major incident response and having existing relationships with key stakeholders. So again, using local expertise, local talents with the local knowledge, but at the same time using the expertise of our PAHO experts as well. Mr. Boxall?
Yes, thank you, Mr. O.C. So we're actually hoping in the looking forward to run this course twice a year, mostly just with our local instructors now. It was good to have Mr. Burgess down, I think, again, from PAHO, but I think he indicated we have quite a good depth and strength now in our local ability to train people. And, it was interesting. We recreated at the Truman Bodden Sports Stadium on Friday night a stadium collapse. We have CRIFTA games hosted here in the Cayman Islands next year.
Mm-hmm.
So there was one scenario was actually rival gangs kind of meeting at the stadium and kind of an incident breaking out there. We did incidents with aircraft accidents. So in all these situations, we were setting up what we call the hot zone or the impact site, and then you know, we bring in the medical people as well. We actually were lucky to have 4 actual hospital doctors on hand for the training. So we set up triage areas where we treat people by priority. Green victims, they could probably wait for treatment for 6 hours. Yellow, 2 hours. Red is needing urgent care. But again, you don't want to overwhelm the hospital. So we set up, areas to collection points where we bring in the victims. Police obviously have to do security. We might set up a VIP area or a media area, staging area for resources. We did one toxic materials incident where there was a plane with some phosgene or some kind of chemical on board, and so fire might have to put the fire out on the plane. There may be an issue for Department of Environmental Health with chemicals. So we're looking at all these different issues and how we would handle them, and we obviously want to keep our first responders safe. With the gang issue, we brought in an armed response unit to make the situation safe before we were able to treat the victims. But we took it seriously. I mean, we had fire trucks on the scene. We had the police incident command vehicle there. We had mobile light sources. We had ambulances, and people took it seriously and worked well together. So I think it, like the minister said, it has helped to make us more resilient and stronger and better able to respond.
Okay. Now, recently we had folks here, and we were talking about the new Motorola system that is, the actual contract and what we will be getting. How much will this improve?
I think it'll make our first responders safer. There are large areas where there are blank spots, particularly in Cayman Brac. So we'll have a new mast going up, I think, on the western end of Cayman Brac by October. So, that if there's a fire or something, they don't want to be in a position where they can't communicate with each other and know if people are injured. Communication's such a vital component of any kind of mass casualty incident or any kind of disaster that really we can't afford to not be able to communicate effectively. So we're really looking forward to it. Also, with the emergency notification system, we've been kind of steadily moving to increase our capacity. I think the public expects us to be able to communicate to them efficiently, and we saw that after the Sol fire and the tsunami incident off Honduras in January. So now we have the radio interrupt system. We're hoping to place the crawling text on the cable channels, and then moving forward eventually possibly cell broadcasts where even if your phone is on silent, it'll let out a loud noise. We'll even be able to capture the phones of cruise ship passengers and send them messages eventually. Because one of our issues is we don't have, Radio Cayman, I think, has got the longest hours of actually having people in the studios. But there are lots of times on the nights and the weekends where it's challenging to get the message out to people. And, we may even end up having to resort to using police cars with loud hailers on it to get messages to people. But we want to try to get it as efficient as we can. So we're going to use numerous different strategies for mass notification.
And that's you mentioned about the weekends, and that's simply because many radio stations have their stations on autopilot as opposed to. I guess you don't call it autopilot, Ms. Susan, right? Or automated system.
Right. I mean, it's a more efficient use of resources if people aren't really awake. Sure. But it presents a problem and a challenge for us, and something that we need to address, and the public frankly expects us to be able to deliver on. So we're going to work on addressing that. It's in our legislation. It wasn't just a knee-jerk reaction to the Sol fire. It was something we already had in the works.
Now, I recall after Hurricane Ivan, and we know that many people had their travel documents destroyed, even though they were encouraged to put them in a safe place. But when you end up with your roof being taken off your residence, and
get it
then
from both
it's
ends.
very
The sea
difficult
comes up
unless
from
you actually
below.
have it in your back pocket, you know. And even if you had it in your back pocket, it probably would have gotten wet as well, because many people were, you know, standing in waist height water, as well as having to go into ceilings and stuff. But eventually, we got in touch with the U.S. Embassy in Kingston, Jamaica, and we were able to talk with them. They offered whatever assistance they could offer. And one of the things we found later on, because so many families, youngsters, were vulnerable because of a shortage of water and everything else, to move people out of the Cayman Islands, those who had relatives or those who had the wherewithal to go to the United States. And this was pre 9/11. So we were able to negotiate something with them. Actually, they offered, we didn't really have to negotiate it. They offered that, you know, people, if they just had some form of identification, it didn't necessarily have to be a travel document, they would accept them into the U.S. Now, those times
I didn't actually
are
know
no
that.
longer-
You're actually
no
teaching
longer
me
here.
something there, Mr. Dosi. I mean, you were obviously highly involved in the in that response phase of Ivan. We have been having annual exercises now, though, with the consular agencies. We recognize, you know, over 80% of probably the tourists are from the States on the aircraft, and the number's probably even higher on the cruise ships. So, you know, we recognize that we need the consular agencies to be involved to assist with the process of you know, tracking people if there are victims and casualties or injuries, ensuring that you know, that people are treated you know, well and respectfully, excuse me. But most importantly, like you say, getting them off the island. I think we had over 10,000 people leave the island in 3 weeks or something,
Yes.
which is an amazing volume of people. Yeah,
And that's all being done by one airline, Cayman Airways.
it was
That's all-
incredible. Yeah.
Except for those companies that had the ability to charter aircraft to bring in to take their staff, and then they
Right.
took other people as well if they,
They
if they
did.
had space.
Yeah, there was a number of private companies and businesses or other banks and so on that moved people offshore in charters, as you say. But yeah, it's a very important component, and now we're exercising on an annual basis with the consular agencies, and we're trying to put in something called crisis hubs, so we can more effectively track missing persons. People can look for relatives and friends, possibly. Again, these are all things that we hopefully don't have to use very often, but we've got to have them in
Got
place.
to be prepared, yes. Folks, please stay tuned. For the record, we'll be back after this short commercial break. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, we have Mr. Simon Boxall, who is the Acting Deputy Director for Preparedness with Hazard Management, Cayman Islands. We're talking about the training for first responders in incident command systems and the mass casualty management that took place on the from the 23rd to the 28th of April of this year. But we're expanding that a little bit, and also including mass casualty response in general, and looking at particular situations or potential situations here in the Cayman Islands as well. I want to remind you that if you want to participate in this conversation, if you have any comments, any suggestions, you can call us on our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flow. That toll-free number, 1-800-534-8255. Don't wait until 20 minutes after 9 to call in. This is an opportunity for you to call before then. While the phone lines are free, we'd like to hear your views on this subject. If you have been affected in any way by situations, similar situations, then we would like to hear from you as well. So our toll-free number, 1-800-534-8255. You can call us also, 949-8037, 949-6990. Email us at fortherecord, one word, for the record, at candw.ky. WhatsApp number, 925-3261 as well. We're going to talk a little bit about the changing Cayman Islands, the changing infrastructure in the Cayman Islands as well. We, unfortunately, in my opening comments this morning, I mentioned the fact that we had another road casualty, as well. The way that we're ending up with traffic on these roads now, the way that traffic can be backed up, for instance, at 5 o'clock, 5:50 and 5:30 in the evening, especially heading east. And God forbid that something would happen that you could have, something toxic spilled, fuel tanker or something like that exploding in that area. Potential, for mass casualties. We look at our hotels now. We've gone to how many stories? 10 stories now?
I think 10 stories,
Yes,
yes.
we've gone to 10 stories. Can our fire trucks now reach those, have the ability for
The upper floors.
to reach those upper floors as well? Those are some of the questions that we have to ask ourselves, and we would want to talk about them. But we have one caller, so let's grab the caller, and I'll give you an opportunity to respond as well. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Hello, good morning to you, Mr. O.C. and Mr. Simon. Very interesting subject you have on today.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Biddy.
When I really look around at what is happening in Cayman in the way of development being done, I ask myself, what have we learned from Ivan? Right opposite the dock in South Sound, they have some apartments there. The ground floor is below sea level nearly. It's below the level of the road, the ground floor. You look at the airport, which flooded. Because it flooded, the computers didn't work and all that happened. They haven't built the new airport floor above where it flooded in Ivan. So we're going to end up with the same problem with people having to be outside on the grass and all over the place, and the total mess up, lack of coordination, lack of communication. When we have Ivan's grandchild, which is going to be a Cat 6. And I see other buildings, but it's so inconsistent, because then when you look at the new government administration building, that is where the height is, and that is where it should be. Nice and high, above any that we know of potential flooding, so the government can continue to operate. But it's so inconsistent in the way it's done. I mean, take our hospital. Our hospital was built too low. Ground floor had flooding in Ivan. And, one of the heroes of this island, as far as I'm concerned, is Mr. Kirkland Nixon. And he was in charge of hazard management from graveyard to graveyard along the West Bay Road. Like, let's take Hurricane Gilbert in '89. When that occurred, there was nobody down there. Now, with the wonders of lack of a development plan, which every politician, let me rephrase that, that's an absolute word, most politicians and most government don't want to come into being. When we have a hurricane coming, where are the people going to go? Some of the hotels with Ivan, people were turned out. And when they said, we're told we have to evacuate, they said, well, where are you going? They told the tourists, that's your problem, not mine. And it's that lack of inconsistency. You just discussed fire. The fire risk with these calls. Years ago, on the planning board, there was somebody from the fire service, which was in effect our hazard management unit. The fire was operated through the fire service. So I really wonder, it just seems to me to be smoke and mirrors in government. Mr. Simon and Mr. O'Leary, was it? The gentleman was there before. He tried. He tried. But most of his pleas were ignored. And to a large extent, I imagine your pleas are ignored too, Mr. Boxall. And really, when are we going to see not press release and photo ops when they get a new radio and all this kind of nonsense? I'm sick of seeing photo ops with politicians. But really causing change. And I'd leave you with one last thought, sir. so that the fire service personnel are not put in danger as much as they have been in the past to go down into some of these developments that are only 6 inches above sea level. I would suggest that it become a standard thing to put on the light poles a red line. This is where the water came in Ivan. So when people are building their homes, although the crazy planning board, lack of standards and no development plan, at least they will see where the water came. So when they're building their homes, the new homes being built, that they're built at or above those lines throughout the island. And so they will know. They've been warned. Here it is on the light poles. Here's where it came. Now, build it above that if you got common sense. I'll leave you with those few thoughts, gentlemen, and listen to what you might have to say.
Thank you very much for that,
you all.
Mr. Billy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Boxall, you want to respond in any way?
Yes, thank you very much for those comments, Mr. Billy. I'd also just like to say, yes, you're absolutely right. Mr. Kirkland Nixon and actually Mr. Donovan Eubanks and others, and OC, deserve credit for helping to establish our disaster management program. I do think that there has been a lot of growth, a lot of improvement along the way in terms of lifting buildings up, lifting generators up onto pads, as you say, the government building, and also moving some of our road infrastructure, having alternative routes inland. But I think both you and Mr. OC, you raise the issue of the 10-story buildings. Do our firefighters have the capacity to effectively respond? And also, Mr. Adam, concerns with the storm surge.
Mm-hmm.
Infrastructure is such a critical component of disaster management because it's really where our vulnerability lies. And we'll soon have a hazard mitigation officer. It's a post that hasn't been filled at hazard management for about 4 or 5 years. But it's a huge issue. In hurricanes, we measure hurricanes by the Saffir-Simpson scale, but that only measures the wind. And we really don't have the capacity to accurately estimate storm surge as it approaches in a hurricane. The U.S. government has products which they give for their coastal areas, their U.S. islands, like U.S. Virgin Islands. But we can't say to you, Mrs. Connolly, we know that the sea in this hurricane is going to come up 8 feet up the side of your house. And as you're only living in a 1-story dwelling, you really should move out. We'd like to have that capacity. We're working towards it. The governor's taken an interest in it.
We did some mapping.
We did this Taos mapping.
Yes. Uh-huh.
But it's not... There's the correlation between the category of the hurricane and the level of storm surge is not very good.
Okay.
We saw Paloma hit as a Category 4, virtually no surge, because the actual radius of the hurricane force winds was only about 7 miles.
Mm-hmm.
So you see very big systems like Sandy, which hit Manhattan with a 10-foot surge, not even a tropical storm. So we're aware that we can have a Category 2 bring over 10 foot of surge, and we're particularly worried. Mr. Billy kept referencing Ivan. That passed 21 miles at the closest point, and it was tracking perpendicular. We know if they come in directly, it was traveling horizontal. If it travels perpendicular, we know it can be twice that volume.
Mm-hmm.
So we could be looking at 700-800 people potentially facing the possibility of drowning if they don't move, and huge structural damage, like you say. Damage to lots of 70% of all the homes had salt water in them in Ivan when we had a 10-foot surge. You imagine what would happen with a 20-foot surge. So we don't have the ability to very effectively map flooding. Developments occurring all the time. We would like to probably at some stage, once we have our baseline, the ability to provide really accurate baseline information. And yes, you did reference the Storm Surge Atlas. The confidence, I think, in that product is not very high, frankly. So we need a much more accurate system of estimating things like tsunami, wave run-up, storm surge. Waves are another completely separate threat. They can be 1.5 times the depth of the water. So we see the water crossing by Pedro St. James near there.
Mm-hmm.
That's because you got really deep water offshore. So if you add an extra 1.5 times to the depth of the water with a storm surge on top of that, you're looking at a huge volume of water crossing the coastline. And we should be bearing these sorts of things in mind, because every cubic yard of water weighs a ton. What could that do to our buildings? We should be looking at possible vulnerability, not just on the ground floors, but on the second floors of some of these buildings on the coast. So hopefully one day we will be in a position in not too distant future where hazard management could have a mitigation officer who's attending some of these planning and development meetings. That's not really for us to decide. I mean, it's a high-level decision. It's a political decision, really, but it would be good to have, I think, some input in the planning process in terms of vulnerability from certainly hurricanes, earthquakes, flooding, and tsunami.
Okay. We have one caller, but we have a commercial break to go to. We're going to take the quick commercial break, and then we will take that caller. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Mr. Simon Boxall from Hazard Management Cayman Islands. We have one caller. Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. O.C., and good morning, Mr. Boxall.
Good morning, sir.
Yeah, I was listening to Billy just now, and he's absolutely right. What happens here in Cayman, that people talk about, getting things done, but then if it's not, I'm talking about how people, government officials and stuff like that, if it's not something that they decided it's not important right now, we can do it later. And then they try to do it after the fact, and they got all kinds of problems. A good example of that is, when before I won, we had talked about all this, the same thing we talked about now, and people do this. In fact, I was involved in that, and I tried to tell government that they've got to have infrastructure in place. We don't wait till there's a disaster and then we go try to fix it. But nobody listens to that. They got their own agenda. But I'll give you an example. People talk about storm surge. A lot of people don't understand what storm surge is. Storm surge mostly occurs where there are flats. You know what a flat is? Like a shallow thing that goes out from beyond the land and goes out, like in the Gulf of Mexico. That's why New Orleans and that place down, they get flooded so bad because it's flat. And what happens is that when the storm comes, when it's out there in the deep water, it doesn't, happen. But once it hits those flats, then the waves begin to slow down. And as they slow down, the next wave catches up on top of that, and that keep pushing and pushing, one after the other. And by the time it reaches land, it's got this big, giant wave. I mean, that's what happens. It's simple as that. So until we realize that, that's why Iowa did so much damage, because it came from the North Sound area, and all the places up there were, nothing was happening on the south side. But because that little flat up in there, the water was pushed into the waves, and as the waves pushed one on top of the other, it gradually grew and grew and grew. That I know some of my friends that live in
Caller, we're starting to lose you. You might be losing power. If you're on your speakerphone, if you came off, you're going to last longer.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
The thing is, when up in after I was, those people I was saying, my friends was over and have this club on the beach side. I'm getting up on the fence.
We've lost him.
Yeah, we've lost the caller there. Thank you, caller. If you get that phone working, try calling back again. If you haven't finished your the idea that you wanted to get across to us, Mr. Simon.
Absolutely. As we know, the wind blows counterclockwise around the roughly circular eye, increasing kind of in velocity because it's got a shorter distance to go as it comes to the eye. So as it tracked from east to west along the south coast, the wind at some points was blowing directly on shore, and that's where you see the surge occurring. When it's blowing the wind offshore, as we saw, as it tracked from east to west, apparently all the water in Cayman in those lagoons blew completely out of it and left it totally dry. There were reports also at a certain point off Sunset House, they could see like a wall kind of water being held offshore by the wind. But if you just happen to be in the point of the hurricane where the rotation is blowing the wind onto you, if you've got a shore, it can come up quite high. And Caller was right as well about needing a certain amount of shallows, because that kind of pins the water in, and it becomes worse even in bay areas, like in that awful situation in Hainan, in the Philippines, in Tacloban, where thousands and thousands of people had water. And we saw it in Mitch, people where the storm just parked on them for 2 days in the Bay Islands, and they're holding infants in their arms with water up to their chests. We're really, really worried about it. I mean, and our buildings and our development and our planning definitely, where we place our critical infrastructure, our hospitals, as Mr. Billy said, our police stations. We can't build bunkers, but at a certain point, I think we should be looking at how we make sure our critical infrastructure is certainly hardened, and we are doing that. I mean, we have subcommittees which are meeting every year. Utilities, CUC. We recently put in a piece of fiber from the shore in Cayman Brac to the antenna, the mast across the road from Aston Ruddy, because in Ivan the radio Cayman failed. So now we've hardened that all the way from Grand Cayman all the way to that antenna, by placing the fiber underground rather than running it on a cable across on the road on the posts. We are moving towards sort of hardening and trying to evolve and trying to learn and from lessons, but I think we could do a better job, honestly. I mean, even just from the last year's experiences in the other overseas territories in Maria and Irma, BVI, their economy is really recovering slowly. We don't want to be in a position where we are so vulnerable that our economy could basically be,
precisely, yeah,
viable, no longer viable.
Now, some of the problems associated in developing a mass casualty management system are identified as one, limited human resources, and it talks about due to the shortage of human resources, a country will experience difficulties in developing, training, and maintaining specialized personnel. Since staff are fully occupied with the daily routine tasks, it will be difficult to develop a mass casualty management approach with staff exclusively reserved for emergency management. Many countries, therefore, must either persist at a lower level of organization, or they are forced to quote-unquote import a non-adapted organization. Where does the Cayman Islands fall in that category as far as human resources to address mass casualty issues?
Well, we have a lot of very highly skilled and well-trained people in our first response agencies here in the Cayman Islands. We've got good depth. I think one of the issues we see is sometimes the leadership doesn't necessarily come along to these trainings, and these are the people that are making the decisions. I mean, it was great to see Mr. Marlon Bodden come along, Deputy Head Collector of Customs. But we don't want to be in a situation, I think, where the leadership, we've got lots of well-trained local first responders, but because the leaders aren't necessarily aware of these mechanisms, these formulas for actually, achieving a good result. So that's kind of why I think we need to keep on doing these trainings, and hopefully even the very senior leadership will start coming along for incident command systems. And that being said, we did have quite a lot of managerial people, but it may take a few years before they actually ascend to the very peak positions within their respective agencies. But 40 people trained, and hopefully if we continue to do this on a biannual or annual basis, we should be in a position to...
Okay. Another inhibitor is identified as limited material resources, secondary, tertiary hospitals for an area, minimal transport resources, like, for example, ambulances. Where do we stand in that regard?
Well, in a major incident, we'd probably activate the National Emergency Operations Center, and one of the subcommittees is resource support. So they might be tasked with finding additional transportation, buses. We do think in a mass casualty incident, we're not going to strictly rely on Georgetown Hospital. We'd probably open up the district clinics, hopefully, and we do plan to have the Doctors Hospital, formerly Chrissy Tomlinson Hospital, involved. So yeah, I think it does give us an opportunity during the training to see these gaps, and like we should be doing with the sort of infrastructure, the building, the development. We try to sort of look at how we can improve, how we can do better, how we can change, and we're continually trying to improve. We've got another couple of exercises coming up in the next few weeks: the hurricane exercise, the airport exercise. So especially the airport exercise will give us another opportunity to look at this mass casualty response.
Excellent. We're going to our headline news at 9 o'clock. That's a very, very short break. I want to remind our listeners, you can participate. You'll only have about less than half an hour to call in. Our toll-free number provided courtesy of Flo, 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037, 949-6990. Email us at fortherecord, one word, fortherecord, at candw.ky. Going to that headline news now. For the Record will return immediately after our headline news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We're on the last half hour of our show this morning. A very interesting topic. My discussion involves Mr. Simon Boxall, who is the Acting Deputy Director for Preparedness with Hazard Management Cayman Islands. We're talking about the first responders training in incident command systems and mass casualty management that took place from the 23rd to the 28th of April of this year. And we've expanded our discussion not just to that particular training session, but to talk about the Cayman Islands and our abilities and our preparedness for any mass casualty incident as well. Before we went to the commercial break, or to our headline news, I should say, not a commercial break, to our headline news, we were talking about some of the problems that are identified as being associated with in developing mass casualty management. We spoke about limited human resources, and I asked Mr. Boxall to point out where we in the Cayman Islands are as far as the human resource element of that is concerned, or aspect of that is concerned. We also spoke about limited material resources in terms of transport, ambulances, and the like. And another problem that has been identified as being associated with developing a mass casualty management system is the lack of radio communications. And we may sound repetitive with this because we mentioned it earlier, talking about our enhanced 911 system, the emergency system that we spoke about on For the Record not too long ago as well. And what basically says that three conditions that I spoke about there, if we those are in place, then they certainly go towards having a smooth and well coordinated system. And if you have a proper radio communication system, then it makes dispatching easier and all of those other things. Where are we with that?
Well, as you referenced, we're hoping to have the new Motorola 911 system, emergency communication system in place, I think, within a year. It is vitally important. There are some areas with blank spots, and obviously, if firefighters or police officers are responding to an incident, they need to be able to communicate. It can be a life or death issue. And so I think we've been fortunate so far not to lose, really. I don't know if we've never lost a first responder but I think we've got to make sure, especially as we grow and develop, that we keep pace, and we are working on that. We'll have a new mast up in Cayman Brac in October, and that'll cover a lot of the blank spots in the Brac that people have been complaining about. And we are, continuing to try to improve upon it. We've actually quite good at communicating within government agencies. Our first responders can talk to each other, which is actually not the case in a number of other islands. Police can't talk to fire, can't talk to EMS or the hospital. We can, but being able to actually have the capacity to know where our first responders are, which these new radio systems will give us, we can actually put a GPS point on the map where they actually are. I think we might even be able to tell if they fall to the ground and go down. So, in a smoke situation where you've got a fire, this could enable rescues and things to take place. But communication is such a vital component that it's good that we're getting a better system, because it's an area where our technology is quite old now. It's hard to get new parts for it. It's starting to become redundant, and this will put us right at the forefront and keep us going into the future for a good while to come.
Now, I know from PAHO that we got a pretty good report in terms of our abilities, but if there are gaps in our system, where would you say those gaps exist in terms of our preparedness?
I'm really glad to see that we're getting a hazard mitigation officer, that the decision makers in government have decided to fill that post, because that looks at things like our basic threats and vulnerabilities. How high can the storm surge go? We should know exactly all the houses, single-story houses in low-lying areas, just exactly how high it'll go up, their ceiling. Is it going to leave them with no place to go? I mean, we should know these things, and as a hurricane is approaching, we should be able to tell people, this is really realistically the threat you face. You really have to evacuate. I don't think we're been able to really map flooding very well. People should know where to put their cars to avoid losing them in a storm surge event. I'd like to see us have better ground speed acceleration data for earthquakes, so we know how to. There are components in our regulations, building and control regulations about seismic components, but I think if we know what a tsunami wave could potentially do, rather than just guess. So some of this baseline data is an area where I think having this mitigation officer on board, we're going to start to be able to really get a handle on what the level of the threats are, what our vulnerabilities are, and then I think at that point we'd be in a better position to maybe have a say in the development and planning process, which we haven't had before. And as some of the other callers raised earlier, our infrastructure, our buildings, our properties, there's a lot of vulnerability that we've got to make a decision. Is it acceptable? Or do we need to continue to look at other things? I mean, some people talk about sea level rise and climate change. Are we factoring these things in for our children and grandchildren? Should we be trying to build resilience into our electrical grid and our water distribution systems? Some of the critical areas where, people, have come to completely depend on. I mean, we're becoming increasingly dependent on internet. How much is that factored into the development and planning process to ensure that we don't lose internet capability for 2 to 3 months? Because what could that do to business? At what point do businesses start to say, we can't operate without water for 2 to 3 months, we've got to have water? So I think we do need to continue to look at these things. We can't just sort of stop and wait for the next impact, next hit to actually change. I think it needs to be reviewed more frequently. So that would be the area I see. Because I think even with satellites, radar systems, I honestly think a very big system has a potential to cause hundreds of people to drown. I honestly do believe that we're still quite vulnerable from like a hurricane the size of a Mitch, that people just, they either don't, I don't know what stops people preparing for something like that. But I hope it's not lack of information, that we're not getting the word out to people that the threat is real.
Yeah.
And we have hurricane season approaching us again in a couple of weeks now. So get your food, get your water, and figure out where you're going to keep your family safe.
Now, this officer that you spoke about, that post has now been funded. It's just a matter of recruitment, or what?
It's been funded, and the recruitment process is imminent.
Okay.
People have applied for the position.
It's quite a technical position, I would imagine.
It's heavily based on things like mapping. And, you're probably aware in other places like Florida, for instance, they map where areas flood quite accurately down, even a block and parcel. They separate out a block and parcel into the flood areas based on like maybe 100-year flood, a 50-year flood event. But I think this will give us better understanding of what the risks are, what the vulnerabilities are, and will help us. And help our residents, our local residents, appreciate the threat better. Because I think, for instance, with the wind velocity increasing as it tends to increase as it gets close to the eye wall, and only Ivan passing at 21 miles away at the closest point of approach, people in West Bay and North Side didn't actually feel the full effect because they were that sufficiently far away. So I worry that people are going to judge past experiences and say, wow, that was the worst that could possibly ever happen.
It didn't affect me, yes.
And it's not. It's not. It could come from a different angle. And so.
Now, we heard Mr. Adam talk about the fact that, we need to mark on the light poles. This is, where the water height came. We do have some empirical evidence in terms of the flooding that took place in the Cayman Islands. How helpful will that information be? Is it readily available to anyone coming in to take up that position, to have some empirical evidence to work with?
They will have access to that, whether or not all local residents, particularly the vulnerable ones, possibly people who are economic. It's unfortunate that there's a cost attached to the maps. So it's not as maybe as easily available as it could be for somebody who just needs to know, okay, how high is my house above sea level? Say it's 10 foot above sea level. So I've got to consider the possibility of 20-foot surge. And, okay, so the water would come this high up my wall in a really big event. So it would be great if people could make informed decisions and have easy access to the maps. But I think, our hazard mitigation officer will have the capacity to go to lands and survey, get a lot of really, really good information. The hurricane's flood map, Hurricane Ivan flood map, is available. And that would be an interesting product to incorporate into their sort of work area. But yeah, there's lots of things, and I think we need to work with the National Hurricane Center, possibly the UK Met Office, to figure out how we can accurately predict storm surge before the arrival of a hurricane. We need to be able to tell people this is really what you're going to face, and almost know it down to like a few inches. because I worry that they're judging these things on the wind, Saffir-Simpson wind speed, and that's not our primary threat. It's the surge.
Okay. We're going to take our last commercial break for the morning. Folks, please stay tuned. The conversation with Mr. Simon Boxall will continue immediately after this short commercial break. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Mr. Simon Boxall, the acting Deputy Director for Preparedness at Hazard Management Cayman Islands. We're talking, we started talking about a training session that took place from the 23rd to the 28th of April of this year, and that had to do with incident command systems and mass casualty management. We have expanded the conversation to cover even more than that, and I'm going to ask him now, with the upcoming hurricane season not too far away, we can certainly talk about giving you some advance notification and advice in relation to some of the things that you should start preparing to do if you have not already started to do so. Mr. Simon.
Thank you, Stacey. Yeah, I think a lot of us look around our homes and there's not a huge amount of space to store things like water or non-perishable food. We've got a whole list of things that we recommend you have on our website, caymanprepared.ky, www. But, my firm belief is that we have to have, as a very minimum, some food and water, and most importantly, a safe place to shelter. And especially, we were talking a lot about our first responders. They have to be prepared. There's really no doubt that they need to be able to go to work without worrying about the safety of their family members. They've got to know that they've done the right thing, the best they could to keep them safe, so they can help in the relief and response recovery phases, get back to work immediately. We're looking at the possibility of being able to redeploy non-essential government workers, hopefully at some point, possibly training up non-essential government workers as shelter managers one day. But at the moment, we really want to emphasize that the public, residents, our families, that they need to sit down. We've got a family plan document. Think about what you're going to do for a hurricane. Who's going to trim back trees? Who's going to put up the shutters? Who's going to make sure we have a bit of food and water and that kind of thing? And did you have a grab-and-go kit? Earlier in the show, you mentioned people losing a lot of documents, photographs, and things. If you can, I have like a little Pelican box. They're kind of a bit expensive, but you can get any kind of waterproof container to put your passports and insurance and will and land deeds and so on. You don't want to lose those. So, there's lots you could be doing. On the approach of a hurricane, I recommend people putting water in a plastic bag about halfway up and then just stuffing it in the freezer just to make drinking water, and also have ice to keep your fridge and freezer cold in the aftermath. But water, food, and a safe place to stay, to ride out these incredible, devastating events. That has to be on the foremost. And it's a good time to plan about it now, in the next couple of weeks.
And I believe Public Works is today that the shuttering program starts as well?
I think, right, the shuttering exercise.
Yes,
yeah. And then we have a hurricane exercise coming up in a couple of days as well, May 2nd and 3rd. So a lot going on. You're going to hear a lot more about hurricanes in the coming days. But I do appreciate that opportunity just to reinforce the message. And don't depend on the bathtub, because, again, if the water comes up, that could fill it. So you need some closed containers for the water. Yep.
Okay. We still have about 8 minutes left. So I want to give you an opportunity to rehash, in relation to the training session, lessons learned from that, the reaction from the participants, as well. And then I'll read probably some more comments from the course coordinator as well.
Thank you very much. So we had this mass casualty management incident command systems training last week from the 23rd to the 28th. 40 of our local first responders practicing, learning, and working together for basically an incident such as a plane crash, a large transportation incident, say involving numerous victims. We looked at toxic material incidents, active shooter, all these different scenarios, and we worked together, police, fire, the emergency medics on the ambulances, the staff at the hospital. We set up triage areas in the field where patients were assessed for the immediacy of the care they needed. And it was just a very good opportunity for them to work together, try to make sure our response is efficient and as effective as possible. These things don't happen very frequently, fortunately, mass casualty events, but we have to be ready and we have to be able to respond well. So it was a great opportunity, and I think people learned a lot. It was quite exhausting. The exercise went on till 3 a.m. at the Truman Bodden, but one of the things we were looking at was the possibility of a stadium collapse. Hopefully ours is fine, but with Carifta Games coming up next year, hosting it at the Truman Bodden, we felt it was appropriate to look at access points for the stadium, how we would potentially respond, where we'd set up things like staging areas for vehicles, media areas, possibly if VIPs were coming to the scene, crowd control, all these different things. It's a very complex thing responding to a mass casualty event involving numerous victims, many different government agencies, and trying to work together seamlessly and efficiently is important. And so it takes practice.
Okay. Now, one of the recommendations, it says mass casualty management systems must be evaluated annually through a simulation. Through a simulation process. Okay, I lost part of that there, but it talks about the fact that it should be done annually. It should be a part of our national preparedness. So we do it here on an annual basis as well, right?
Well, we haven't been running the training annually. We did run it last time in Cayman Brack. At the very end, December 2016.
Okay.
But we're planning to institute it on a twice-a-year basis now, the training. And hopefully we're going to use our own local instructors and possibly only bring PAHO down now once every 3 years.
Okay.
Because we've got good local capacity. But we need to, I think we recognize that this is something that needs exercising on a regular basis, as that caller pointed out. Because if you don't build that muscle memory, if you don't learn to work together, it becomes much more challenging. Mm-hmm. So I think practice, we recognize, is vital.
Okay, and I promised that we would read some more comments from Ms. Danielle Coleman, who is the course coordinator as well. Mm-hmm. And she's quoted as saying it is important that we have pre-established procedures in place for rescue mobilization, incident site management, and hospital reception in the event that we face a large emergency situation, especially those involving multiple victims and a multi-agency response. This course makes us better prepared to provide prompt and appropriate assistance to victims. It will help us to prioritize the victims and minimize further injuries, so the most critical receive the most immediate medical attention. And she also says that depending on the type of incident, one particular agency assumes overall responsibility as the incident commander, and they are supported by all other first responders. And I'm going to stop there just simply to talk about that. The ability for a particular agency to recognize that this is the incident that they're in command of, and for all of the other agencies to know their role and the secondary or tertiary role that they may play in that, so that you don't, have this situation where one trying to climb over the other.
Right. I mean, leadership, especially in a crisis, is critical. As you know, I mean, you've been in very senior roles for some of these impacts in the past. I mean, we were looking at toxic materials incident. We had a mock exercise where a plane came down with 11 people on it carrying a toxic chemical called phosgene. So in those sorts of situations, we have Department of Environmental Health with responsibility for response to chemical situations, but then fire also has a role because the plane was on fire.
Yes.
So who do you prioritize? It might also be a criminal act that brought the plane down, so there might need to be an investigation. So where does the police fit? Where does Department of Environmental Health? Where to fire? And then obviously concerns for people's lives. The medical aspect is another component that comes into play. So it can be really pretty complex, and knowing who's the leader and when they hand over the incident command, possibly once the fire's out, police might come in. So these are things where we can't have people squabbling about leadership roles in a critical incident.
Definitely.
And, it was a good opportunity, and the people that were in the training, took it seriously, put in a lot of work. Going till 3 a.m, people were exhausted, but you never know when these things are going to happen. It's probably not going to be between 9 to 5. So they were pushed to the max. I mean, they started their day at 8:30 in the training rooms and went till 3 a.m, and everybody stuck with it. They took it seriously. There was no grumbling or complaining. That they knew that this was, just what needed to be done. It was good to see.
Yep. Okay, Mr. Simon, again, I want to thank you very much for making yourself available this morning,
Thank you.
For engaging in a very, very important topic, discussion here this morning as well. And I know that our listening and viewing audience have and will continue to benefit from conversations of this nature and presentations of this nature as well. So I want to thank you very much for being here this morning.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And to you, our listening and our viewing audience, I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension, For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers. There is always someone out there who is less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want or even those who crave. I say to you, have a great day. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Sterling Dwayne Ebanks at 12 noon for a talk today. And as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these 3 beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.